Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, Chief Storymaker and your host of this podcast. We share stories for many reasons. We want to persuade, we want to entertain, and we want to connect. But what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're being perceived by the people you're sharing them with. In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you and you'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into lessons from each of those stories. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? Well, when I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, but not to respond necessarily. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your related stories, and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. I am so lucky today. I get to spend some time on the phone with my friend, Kris Macchiarola. And she goes into companies, organizations, and help them solve people problems. She helps them recognize the human in the human workforce. And that, of course, speaks dearly to me and to a lot of our listeners. So welcome to the podcast. Your stories don't define you, how you tell them will.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to be here with you.
So I always start my podcast by introducing the guest in a kind of an interesting way. I always ask for a story or something that you can share with us that is not on your LinkedIn profile, it's not on your resume, something most people might not know about you. And it's always something interesting. And I ask that question because I like for the listeners to feel some different kind of connection with you before we start sharing stories, to give them some context.
Yeah. So I guess probably the best story that I feel like has been most defining for me over the last few years really started with the death of my father, and that was a catalyst for me to start looking at everything in my life through a very different lens than I had ever done before. And not too long after he died, I had been working for a corporation that I'd been with for a few years, and they were going through a downsizing, so a reduction in workforce, and they were eliminating a number of divisions, and mine was one of them. And I could have stayed and taken a hybrid position, but it wasn't going to be something that feeds my soul. And that really was one of the big lessons that I took after my father's death was, looking at this life and am I just existing in it, or am I living with intention? And so I decided to honor that whisper that was telling me I needed to do something differently. And that's how I decided to leave corporate America. And that started me on a journey of vulnerability that continues to this day and has just been so life-changing for me. So while it was a very tragic event that was the catalyst, and certainly miss my father every day, there have been really good things that have happened since his passing that I use that to really help me peel back those layers and start to understand who I am and what I want out of this life.
Wow. I find that most often those pivotal times come as a result of some sort of tragedy or death. Whether it's a permanent injury, disability, or the death of somebody close with us. I'm not surprised at all by that, but I'm really glad you shared that, because it's not something that I had seen in any of your writing or seen anywhere on your LinkedIn profile. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
And I guess that kind of leads us right into the whole theme of our conversation. We've been talking for about a year about this particular theme, and it hasn't changed much in terms of the dynamic that I'm seeing in the people around me. So it was about a year ago we started talking about people, but particularly women in transition, and that we know a lot of women right now that are going through this, and there's no generalizing who these women are in terms of age or education level or ethnicity or cultural background. I'm finding that women as young as 35 are going through this transition phase. And I'd like to think that it's because there's kind of an awakening going on, at least in the United States, but I think all over the globe, of people realizing how important it is to live their lives fully present.
Yes. Yes.
So tell me a story related to how you understood transition in your life. Maybe another one of those pivotal times where you realized you were in transition and how you approached that.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point, I think that as women, so many of us are going through some of the same things, and yet we don't necessarily know it, because even with all of this technology, a lot of times we feel very disconnected, and we don't know how to get ourselves out of this feeling of being disconnected. We yearn and thirst for these deeper connections, but we're sometimes stuck. We feel like we're the only ones going through this, and I think we're definitely not. In my conversations with women, and I run a women's group, and I'm involved in a lot of different women's groups that don't overlap, and I keep hearing these same conversations, so it's always fascinating to me to talk about it. But I would say, for me on a personal note, the past couple of years, I was feeling stuck in a personal relationship, and I was changing so much from a personal development, professional growth standpoint, but this personal relationship, the other person wasn't changing at the same pace, or there was definitely some disconnection. We weren't necessarily even enjoying some of the same things. So the things that would feed my soul weren't necessarily the things that would feed this other person's soul. So there was a misalignment there, and it was causing a lot of friction. And I wasn't dealing with that very well. And, feeling like I was going to hurt this person if I said something. So there was a lot of guilt in keeping this to myself, and it wasn't helping, because while I wasn't communicating this overtly, everything about my actions and my body language was definitely communicating something. And so
Isn't it funny? Isn't that funny how we think we're hiding something and the people around us just don't want to bring it up because it's clear that we're hiding something?
Right. And so then, it becomes this elephant in the room, and like, who's going to be the one to acknowledge it first, right? I mean, at this point, the elephant is stomping. This is not a whispering elephant. This elephant is loud and stomping everywhere. And so I don't know if you know Amy Lore at all, but she's become a good friend of mine. And I remember her telling me, you know your truth. Because I was saying, I need to find my truth. She's like, no, you know your truth. You just need to embrace it and communicate it and start practicing self-forgiveness, self-compassion, and self-love. And that was so freeing to me, because she was absolutely right. I did know my truth. I just wasn't honoring it. And so to answer your question, I think when you're in this state of transformation, sometimes it can be really amazing and positive, and sometimes it can be something that we're fighting it for various reasons. And getting back to what your values are and aligning that with your intentions and honoring that in a way that serves you. Sometimes that means letting go of the things that aren't serving you and that are actually toxic for you, but that takes courage, and it takes honesty, and it takes action. It's not enough to just say, I know I need to do this. You actually got to commit to doing it and then following through. So
did you have a conversation with this person? I mean, what happened?
Yes, we did. And there was a lot of pain there. There was a lot of layers to go through. Like, how did we even get to this place? But once we did that, things were so much better. And I just laugh at myself because, my background's in psychology. I was a psychologist for the school systems. Like, I know this stuff, right? That doesn't mean that when it comes to ourselves, that we always see clearly. We all have our blind spots. We all have our fears. And I think one of the biggest fears is we don't want to hurt other people that we care about. But in the end, we are, if we're not communicating with transparency. And so once we had these series of conversations, because it wasn't a one and done, we're actually in a much better place now, and I think probably stronger. But it took going through acknowledging that the truth actually looks different now than it did before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. So let's talk about it. Let's pull back those layers. What's your truth? What's my truth? Where do we align? And having some of those deeper conversations instead of talking around the issue and avoiding the elephant in the room.
So you've continued with this relationship. You didn't have to end it.
Yes. No, I thought that walking away and ending it was going to be the answer, but I've come to see that, just being patient sometimes, and sometimes it's not about giving up. Maybe sometimes it's about walking towards, even when you don't want to.
I find that so inspiring, because I think it is our initial response that this is just not going to work and walking away is the only answer. But what I found many times is that when it's coming from internal, we're looking at this just from our perspective.
Right.
And we're not seeing necessarily what's going on for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, because we're so wrapped up in our own world and our own understanding of what's wrong.
Right.
And I had this conversation with a coaching client of mine because she was concerned that her partner wasn't growing like she was growing. And I said, but does your partner think that he's growing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and in his situation where he is right now, do you think maybe his growth is being stunted because he's in an unhappy place in the other aspects of his life? And so I know when I'm stuck in a bad position, particularly job-wise, and I identify, my identity is so wrapped up in what I do, that if I'm in a bad place, I'm going to have a hard time expanding elsewhere.
Yes. There's those ripple effects.
Exactly.
And I think to your point, I can definitely relate to what you're saying about, my part of my identity is what I do, because I find so much value in what I do and helping others. And I think men in particular, they definitely define themselves by what they do. And so when they are not experiencing a good workplace or able to grow the way they would want to professionally, it definitely takes a toll on other aspects of their life. And they don't always know how to get out of that place, ask for help, communicate what's going wrong, or, what they want and differently out of it. Yeah.
And I find that just asking questions really helps. That would be my first part of that conversation that you had to have with your friend, that relationship that you were struggling with, is to ask those questions that you're grappling with, so that then once you hear kind of that part of the perspective, then you can maybe readjust how you were thinking the relationship was going.
Yeah. So from the coach in me, 100% right on, but I wasn't able to coach myself.
Right. I know.
Right? So I'm great at listening to other people and being able to help them clear the clutter, to see the path and come up with strategies that will work for them. I couldn't do it for myself, which I think speaks to why we all need coaches and mentors and people that can help us see clearly, because it's just like a physician. They can't treat themselves, right?
Exactly.
And
that's so important.
Yes.
I actually tell people, if you want to be a coach, you need to hire a coach.
Yes.
Because if you don't work with a coach, whether that's through trade or an informal coaching, if you're not working with one, how valuable do you think it is? I mean, if you're not valuing it yourself,
That's
what kind of coach can you be?
Exactly. And you need to be able to see how you had blind spots and someone else illuminated them for you. There's a reason why they call them blind spots, right? And so we all need someone else to be that honest mirror for us, because we just can't do it by ourselves, and that's okay. There's nothing weak about that. There's actually strength in seeking help from others.
So we've covered the basic in terms of when we're in transition and somebody else around us isn't necessarily in transition or in a different kind of transition, how hard that can be on your relationships, even if it's a positive transformation, growth, it can be kind of damaging to our relationships if we're not sharing it with the people that are closest with us.
Right.
But internally, what I find when I'm working with people is that they go one way or the other in terms of their viewpoint of transition. So there are some of my friends and clients that it's like they're standing at a doorway that's open, and there's kind of an institution behind them. All that they've known is behind them inside this house or institution, and they're looking out to the open, and there might be clouds overhead. I have this very strong visual image of it, and there are lots of different paths. And some people come to that doorway, and we're all by ourselves in this. I mean, we may find company on the paths and inside those institutions, but we're really on our own. And I find that some people, they look out at these paths and they're totally overwhelmed to the point that it scares the crap out of them.
Right.
And they turn around and go back, even if they know what's inside isn't going to make them happy. But they're so overwhelmed by the choices. And then there are others who stand there and look at it and they kind of freeze because they're so excited by what's in front of them. It's hard to take that first step. Like, which way do I want to go? Oh my gosh, there's so many options.
Right.
And then I flip to this other analogy where you're standing, you're starving, you're so hungry, you haven't eaten in 24 hours, and you're looking at this menu with 150 items on it, and you can't decide because there are too many options, and you walk out hungry. So I kind of mix my analogies there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what that, one of my favorite things to talk about is neuroscience and the brain, the lizard brain, the ego. And I think what you're describing very much is our survival mechanism of that, fight, flight, or freeze. And so sometimes, when we see that, because I always describe my journey of leaving corporate America very much like that, of the door. I could see the institution behind me and the door is before me, and do I want to walk through it? And I think that, very much it's a survival mechanism. And so it is, do you want to take that leap? Do you want to walk through that door, or do you want to flee and go back the other way because it's the devil, And sometimes that comfort zone is really appealing to us, right? I don't care how miserable you are, the devil, we know how bad that is. We don't know what's going to happen when we walk through that door. And so, sometimes it's easier to freeze or flee. If we do walk through that door, we're ready for the fight, right? And but I do think we self-create this fear, and we don't stop to really give enough attention to the what if scenarios that are best case. We always think about worst case scenario and all of the things that go with that. And, I always tell people, I wrote a post about this yesterday on LinkedIn, because people will say, but what if I go down this path and it doesn't go the way that I want it to? Okay, well, first of all, I think you should expect that, because the likelihood that things are going to go perfectly is almost zero, right? So expect the stumbles, expect the failures, have a plan in place, know who your phone a friend is or what you're going to do, expect to pivot. That's okay. You get to define what success looks like, but not to think that this is going to be a perfect journey. I mean, no one ever said anybody's journey is going to be perfect and that you should expect that. That's just not true. And we compare ourselves, and our stumbles to someone else's highlight reel, and we're not seeing all the stumbles they had along the way. It's a very unfair comparison that we allow our brains to engage in, and it doesn't serve us well.
And I honestly think I wouldn't want the perfect journey, because if we have this idea of what's going to happen and it happens that way, then we haven't had other opportunities that might have come our way. We ignored them or we dismissed them because we had this vision of how this was supposed to go. And we miss things that way.
Yes.
So did you have like a conversation with somebody, or was there a moment after you left corporate world that you had that the light bulb went on and you realized, I am exactly in the right place for me?
Yes, but before that happened, it was a tremendous amount of fear.
Of course.
because for me, it was not just walking away from the golden handcuffs, which is where I thought the fear was really. And then I realized I was just lying to myself, that the real fear was the fear of being vulnerable and putting myself out there, because I no longer had a big company name to hide behind. And so when I realized that it was the fear of vulnerability, then I was like, okay, this is actually exhilarating. Like, I can use this as a catalyst to catapult me forward now that I know what it really is. But yeah, I can remember, I'm a one-person show, so I had to do all the business development myself and close the clients and then custom create the solutions. And I remember it was my first big client, and they had agreed to allow me to roll out a series of workshops throughout their whole national operating center. We were piloting a couple different ones, and they were all going really well. And I always do surveys, and 100% of the participants were saying they would recommend the class to a colleague. And so I was like, wow, like I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm making an impact. And especially in those first couple classes, I always go around and I will ask people at the very end, tell me something that was challenging or something that you learned about yourself that you didn't know walking in here. And for me, those are the aha moments. And so when we go around the room and everybody has a chance and they're saying the things that I would hope they would say, that they would come away with, that for me is when I knew, like, okay, I'm making a broad impact here, and this is exciting, and I'm actually using my skills and bringing value, and so that's been rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. I remember walking away from a workshop with a regional group of sales folks, and they had a 2-day retreat. And I was there on it was 3-day retreat, and I was there on the second morning for a couple of hours. And we were talking about how to use storytelling in your sales, and basically how to connect with people and draw out the stories of other people. And I remember, those 2 hours having these people share pretty intense stories.
Yeah.
And one of them actually said, I've never shared that before. That insecurity I had when I was in school. And
Right.
then by the end, people, the whole group had been laughing, there were tears, and by the end they were all hugging each other.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out and getting into the car and having that rainbow or the lightning bolt, whatever you want to call it, of, oh my gosh, this is what I was born to do.
Yeah.
This is powerful stuff.
It absolutely is.
And I cried a little, which I'm not a crier, so that would surprise a lot of people, but I cried a little because I was so filled with relief.
Yes.
I mean, I was happy, but I think I had more relief than anything else, that I was headed in the right direction.
Right.
Did you have anything like that? Anything really specific like that?
I did a workshop that was focused on motivation, and it was for not my usual stuff, because a lot of times organizations won't pay for this kind of a workshop. They might pay for a speech, but not take their sales executives out of the field for 5 hours to talk about motivation, because they just expect to be motivated on their own, right?
Right. So, that's a lot of investment right there.
Yeah. And so what was so cool was most of these folks have been around for 20 years in their field, very successful. And the fact that they'd never been given an opportunity to engage in self-reflection like this workshop provided, as far as not what you're good at, but what actually motivates you, what feeds your soul, what helps you to get up in the morning. And if it's not in your current work, how do we job sculpt to make sure you get that into what you do regularly? And it was just so cool, because a lot of the self-reflection questions were really difficult for them. This wasn't something that they could just answer right off the top of their heads. It required a lot of thinking, and some of them were a little anxious about it. And I, just assured them, like, hey, first of all, this is a psychologically safe environment. There is no judgment here. This is for you. You're not going to be sharing this with anybody. This is for you to ask yourself these tough questions, to spend the time. Your boss believes in you enough that she's giving you this gift to be able to think about what it is that you want. And she's going to help you get there. Because now you're going to take this, this plan that you come up with about the things that actually motivate you, and you're going to have a conversation with her at a later date. So that if what you're doing right now doesn't entail those things that, are your top 5 motivators, she can help you find a way to get more of that in. And so I just thought it was such a cool thing that they believe in their people enough to invest in them. And that for the first time, these are people, in their 40s and 50s, they were having an opportunity to engage in meaningful self-reflection that can make the difference in their happiness and fulfillment, and something that they spend a lot of time doing, So
Right.
That to me was really cool.
Wow. So that's a few different pieces, really. One big piece is that investment in their people means that they're paying you to invest in their people. I mean, that's kind of a double whammy in a good way.
Yes.
That you have a corporate client that trusts what you're putting together is going to have an impact on their people, that it's worth that investment. That's huge.
Yeah. And I mean, but beyond what they were paying me, the cost of taking those producers out of the field for 5 hours times however many people were there, 15 people or whatever. I mean,
right.
Really a big
It's a huge investment.
Yeah. And then that they had a plan to actually follow through on what they created, what they learned. Just thought was so cool. And at the end, they were like, well, can we have you back next year? It's thought, well, this is really awesome. This was a really good day.
That is probably the best compliment ever, is when people want you back. When they say, we want to do this again, or we want to expose other people in our organization to what you're doing here. And I find that I sing with a couple of bands, and when a bar owner, venue hires us back, more than once, that's when I know that we've done something that provided value and that they enjoyed.
Yeah, because words are really nice, but for me, when actions align with words, that's really meaningful to me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Wow. So tell me, I'm guessing that growing up, you had some of this in your household, that you had these moments of realization of what you're really good at, that you probably somehow applied to your successful career in corporate world, but maybe you didn't know it at the time.
I would definitely say I did not know it. So my parents were divorced. My mother's side, they're very risk averse people. They are very loving people, but they are very risk averse. My father's side are more of the risk takers, but I didn't grow up with that side. So I definitely, for the first, I guess probably the first time I felt like I took a big risk was when I graduated from college and made this announcement that I was going to go backpacking through Europe. And my family thought I was crazy. First of all, that I would go backpacking with just myself and a girlfriend. So there wasn't like a big group of people. We didn't have a plan. We literally had backpacks, and that was it, and we were going to just figure it out. And they looked at me like I had 2 heads. They still can't believe that I did. Most of my family has never traveled abroad. And so for me to announce that at 22 was, they were just shocked. But I think that was probably where I was like, okay, to me, that is like one of the best ways to get an education. I love reading, but when you travel, you get to immerse yourself in a culture that's different from your own and see the world through somebody else's eyes that is very different from your own. Because growing up, I didn't have those kind of role models. And I would put myself out there, but I don't know, they were safe things like run for, class president or something like that. Yes, it was putting myself out there, but it wasn't that big of a leap for me. It wasn't until I got to college and then graduate school and then started in corporate America that I felt like, okay, I'm really taking a leap. I mean, I came from a family of teachers. They are very, very safe. Everything is, there's no taking any leaps when you're a teacher, and they have a very important job. but they're very conservative as far as the actions that they take in their lives. And so, yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think I really started to hit my stride until the death of my father and these last few years, and pushing myself way outside my comfort zone, beyond anything I ever could imagine.
And you're loving it.
Absolutely. I mean, I help others, but I grow so much when I do, and right now I'm writing a book about women in their 40s and about this kind of transformation that we're going through. And I haven't titled the book yet, but when I describe it to people, the best way I can describe it is it's a hybrid between A Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, which speaks to that vulnerability piece, which is near and dear to my heart. You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero, and then take some Sex in the City and throw it in there. So it's the relationships, the friendships, it's career, it's mom guilt, it's that life transformation, the vulnerability, all of the things that make a woman in her 40s very exciting and courageous and fabulous and beautiful and very flawed.
And scared.
Absolutely. And it's pulling back the layers. So I'm interviewing women from all over the world. And I was saying, I heard a story last week that made me go, wow, I was not expecting that at all. And it really was just that affirmation that it would be really easy for me not to finish this book if I was just telling my own story. But because these women are opening up their hearts and their minds and being so courageous in the things that they are telling me, I have to finish this book. I have to. I owe it to them. And it's just amazing, some of these stories.
I love the idea of sharing these stories, partly because I know so many women that are in their mid to late 30s that are, working toward 40, and they're afraid of it. They're sad for it. They're grieving it in some way.
Best.
I know. And I'm looking forward to 50, which is it's just around the corner for me.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that I've always kind of embraced those changes and the excitement of it, even when it's painful, even when, I wake up in the morning and my body is sore from overdoing it a little the day before. And I know 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been so sore. But every time I think, oh my gosh, I totally earned this.
Yeah.
And so I try to share that with other people that are getting there.
Yes.
And I shared a story years ago with Whitney Johnson as a guest blogger on her webpage. And it was about how I found my voice at 40. And part of what really drives me is that whole idea that there are so many women that are younger than we are that we can encourage to find their voices before then.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
One of my dear friends just recently passed away, and the thing that keeps popping into my head, her impact on me, was she was probably around 70 and an active tennis player. She won a pairs tennis competition last summer. And so her death was pretty unexpected because she was so fit and so healthy.
Right.
And something she said to me about a year ago when I was the vice president of the Women's Leadership Network here in Helena, I said, I wish I had found my voice a little younger.
Yeah.
I'm a little bummed sometimes that it took me so long to get to this point of confidence and comfort in my skin.
Yep.
And she said, well, you had to go through that to be who you are today.
Yeah.
It was not a moment too soon and not a moment too late. You are exactly where you need to be to help others find their voices.
Yes. I love that. That's so profound. And I think there's so much truth to that, right? I think there's so much truth, but I do agree with you that I had a very similar journey. I didn't find my voice. Not that I was ever quiet. So
no, me either.
But to put myself out there and share my thoughts with the world like I do with LinkedIn, I didn't start doing that until 2 years ago. And at first I can remember just even just sharing somebody else's article was so frightening. And then to comment on somebody's post, oh my gosh, terrifying. And then to actually post your own content. And and get more than just the sympathy likes and comments from your close friends, but other people from around the globe wanting to chime in and relating to it was just so empowering. And I thought, wow, like people actually, want to hear what I have to say. I never would have thought that. And so I would definitely, that's one of the things that I would encourage younger women to do. And but I think to your point, it's part of the journey. And I didn't get comfortable in my own skin, loving myself warts and all until my 40s. I just didn't,
Right.
And it's, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. I love that. And I've said that like 4 times during this conversation. I love that. But it's so true. There's so much truth to it that we have to be okay with ourselves for a long time before we can actually embrace ourselves, which is a totally different thing.
Yep, absolutely. It's funny, this was like earlier this year, and I was talking to somebody that reached out to me on LinkedIn, a woman, and she was in her young 20s. And when I hadn't started writing this book yet, but I was telling her about it and just how I love my 40s, she's like, gosh, I can't wait till I get there.
Oh my gosh.
Like, well, this is great. At least if nothing else, you're not afraid of your 40s. But enjoy where you are right now,
Right, but that is huge to recognize that it's not going to go downhill. That you don't have to do it all today. Yeah. I think that's an important message to young women, that it's going to get better, and that you don't have to rush through this, because you'll get there.
You will get there.
That's a great message.
And I think, as much as I love my 40s, I think with the mindset shift that I've had as far as growth and feeling like I can create whatever I want to create, it's really up to me. That I think that my 50s will probably be just as exciting, if not more. Right now I love my 40s, but I'm not afraid of my 50s or my 60s or whatever. I just think every chapter, brings its own gifts and its own lessons. And as long as you're willing to embrace it, I did interview somebody last week though that made me a little bit sad, because this person doesn't work and not on LinkedIn or anything like that. So a very different journey, I think, in the 40s than most of the women that I know. And one of the questions I ask is, what does it mean to be in your prime? And do you feel like it's already past you or ahead of you? And this was the first person that told me that she thought it was behind her. And I just thought, oh, that just makes me so sad, because we have so much life not just to live, but to create
and to share.
It wasn't time for me to coach during that interview, but I'm going to circle back and be like, we've got to work on this, because there's so much ahead of you, and I want you to be excited about it, not to feel like you're just looking back on things now.
Well, and I find that women like that, men like that too. They feel like they've lost their relevance. And they forget how much they can continue to contribute to the people around them.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's where that happens. And I find that people who are like that have a tendency to not see the value that they can bring. And so they do 2 different things. They either get sad and lose any opportunity, or they find relevance in negative ways. Yeah. They file lawsuits. They stir up fights. They self-sabotage. Yeah. Just in order to feel that relevance again. But it's in such a negative context. I agree. It's sad. Yeah. And it's their journey. And if that's the way they choose to live their journey, then that's up to them. But if they want change, if they want it to be different, there are certainly opportunities to find a different way.
I think for this person, it was more about, her life and impact being over and just living vicariously through her children. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting your children to do more and be better than you and to live, and enjoy their journeys, but you still can a really big impact with your own journey. And we are by no means done in our
of course.
Yeah. So I was just like, okay, I got to circle back on this one. But
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
So this, something you said a few minutes ago kind of triggered one more question for me. when you started putting yourself out there, I know I had a couple of trolls. I had a couple of situations where people weren't so happy to hear what I had to say.
Right.
And luckily, I had been active enough that I had a very strong network to support me.
Yes.
But tell me about when that happened to you and why you continued anyway.
Yeah, there's been a couple examples that really stick out in my mind. So one of them, I was recording a very quick video in my car, and it was a follow-up to a post the previous day where I felt like there was a little bit of misunderstanding. Whatever we were talking about, I wanted to provide a clarification, and I was filming it in my car, recording in my car, and I just thought this was so incredibly noteworthy because there was one woman who said, "Oh, something like, you're what you're saying is fine, but just so you know, there are people in LA who film things in their car and they're homeless." And I was just like, what? Like, what?
Is she implying that you're homeless?
Yes. And the hilarious thing was that she was a psychotherapist. And so there were a couple of things that upset me about that. Normally, I would just let it go. But I have a very good friend through LinkedIn in the UK who has been facing homelessness. And he is brilliant, and he finds ways to do things in cafes with the free Wi-Fi and all that. And I just thought, just because he's having these challenging times in his life does not devalue who he is and the message that he brings to the platform. So from that aspect, it made me mad. And then also, you're a psychotherapist. You should have some compassion if somebody was in that situation. So usually I wouldn't respond, but I did on that one. And I just said, I just find it peculiar that with your training and expertise that you lack compassion if somebody was truly in that situation. And there was no response, but I just couldn't let that one go. But there was one that I did let go, but I think this is hysterical. So this was recent, like within the last month or so. I had posted a video, and this woman went to my website. So she must have searched my LinkedIn page, found my website, went to my website, filled out a contact inquiry form, which came to me through email and said, "I'm not sure if you'll get this, but I would like to provide some feedback for you." Not anybody I know. Okay, sure, knock yourself out, right? We have to be able to accept feedback. So she proceeded to this lengthy email about how she did not like what I was wearing, and sent me links to her videos so I could see what she was wearing. And I just thought, this is so bizarre. And guess what? I'm 45. I am finally comfortable in my own skin. I don't care what you're wearing. You wear what you want to wear. I'm going to wear what I want to wear. We're good. I didn't even respond back because it didn't make any sense to you, but I thought this is hysterical. And this is also an example of someone like, why do you care what I'm wearing? We don't know each other. We don't work together. We're not friends. You're not my mother. We're nothing together. Why does what I wear in a 2-minute video upset you that much?
That you would take that much time and energy to respond to it.
Life. And then secondly, it goes back to, shouldn't we be lifting each other up?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, shouldn't you be, if you're going to use that kind of energy, use it for good. Don't use it for something like that. I just thought on so many levels, this is amazing to me. This is amazing. But I didn't respond because there's no point in responding to something like that.
And it sounds to me like she is self-conscious and kind of trying to figure out how she can help people. And she might be a little misguided in that, in terms of how to help people.
Yes.
I'm sure that she put that out there thinking that she was being helpful to you.
I hope so. I would like to look at it from that lens, to choose to look at it that way. But I just thought, this is insane.
That is very strange.
I would never, spend that amount of time to tell somebody that I don't know.
Right.
Trust
that in depth.
That I don't like what they're wearing. I mean, that's not my place.
Well, and it's just fascinating to me that that's what she cued in on instead of the material that you were providing, the content you were sharing.
She liked my content. The content was great. Not like what I was wearing.
Well, when I started really putting myself out there, I wrote a blog post that ended up it kind of went viral on LinkedIn. And it was controversial, which I was surprised at how controversial it was. And I had given it kind of a controversial title. It was Slobs Don't Get Jobs.
Oh.
And it was a story about something that had happened when I was pretty early in my career in terms of being a manager. And somebody had dropped off an application for a fancy hotel where I was the director of sales in his workout clothes, post-workout.
Yeah.
And this was for a front desk position at a fancy hotel.
Right.
And he dropped this off in his workout clothes, sweaty after workout at the front desk. And, I could have handled it better. At the time, I was pretty new to that environment and certainly new to managing in that way. And so I threw his application in the trash because I thought, if you don't have the common sense to pay attention to what you're wearing and how you're coming across, because you don't know who's standing behind the desk when you drop it off, then I'm not sure I really want you interacting with my customers. And I actually ran into him later and I told him why he wasn't going to get an interview. And I thought at the time, I was doing him a favor, and I knew he was pretty angry when I said that to him.
Right.
And so I wrote this story saying, pay attention to these details. How do you want to be perceived? Dress for the job that you want when you drop off an application.
Right.
And but it was interesting because most of the comments were like, yeah, you shouldn't have to tell people these things. But some of them, and some coming from my good friends on LinkedIn, saying, Sarah, I think you could have handled that differently. Tell him and then have him reapply. Give him an opportunity to fix the problem. Don't just throw the application away. And when I saw some of those comments, I thought, you're right. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have done it differently. Yeah. So I'm responding to all of these comments, and there were hundreds of them, and I'm trying really hard to be considerate and respond to these people who have taken the time and made the effort to comment thoughtful comments.
Right.
And then it kind of, those are short-lived. Any of these posts are pretty short-lived.
Yeah.
Well, about a year later, somebody brought it back up to the surface, and one guy just completely took me apart about what a horrible person I was. And it was really, really personal. It was so mean and just really angry and hostile and seriously mean and verbally abusive.
Wow.
And some of the people that know me immediately came to my defense saying, hey, didn't you see her responses to these other comments, and you're not paying attention, and that this is too personal, and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't see it until there were probably 40 responses to his comment. And most of them were people saying, hey, wait a minute. But a couple of them just jumped right on that bandwagon and told me what a horrible person I was. And it was painful. I mean, really painful.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody sent me a text message. One of my friends sent me a text message and said, don't click on that link. Don't click on that link. And I'm like, what link are you talking about?
No, I have to click on it.
Right. So then one of my other contacts actually called me and said, don't click on the link. I said, what are you talking about? Well, it turns out that this guy was so enraged by my post, which was really a pretty benign post.
Right.
He was so enraged by it that he wrote a whole post on LinkedIn with my name in the title, telling people what a horrible person I was for throwing away this guy's application. It was absurd. But at the time, my heart was pounding. I felt angry. I felt hurt. I felt sad. I didn't even know how to respond, because if I responded, then I would have been feeding into his rage. And so I didn't respond at all. But I'm telling you, my heart was pounding. And the responses from all of these other people, some were not in my close network.
Yeah.
I got so many private messages on LinkedIn and so many comments on my next post supporting me and saying, ignore it. Don't let this stop you from writing, because, you're providing great content here. And I got so much support that it didn't stop me from putting myself out there again.
Good.
But it could have.
Very easily. Imagine if that was very, very early in your journey of finding your voice, right?
Yeah, there's no way.
Silence you. Yeah.
It would have taken a long time to recover from that if I hadn't developed the community that I did.
Yeah.
So tell me about your community in terms of how you were able to, especially because you were kind of the black sheep in the family in terms of taking risks. Mm-hmm. How did you develop the support that you needed to be able to do what you do?
When I decided I was going to walk through that door, I literally had a notepad and a pen and started making a list of my phone of friends, people that I knew I could call on when I stumbled, because I knew I was going to stumble. And my background is not in business. It's in psychology. And so I knew that, I have a master's and a specialist degree in school psychology. It's not in business. So I knew I was going to need help. I knew I was going to stumble. So I had about 2 to 3 pages of names of people that I had worked with or knew, were friends, family, colleagues, husbands of someone, whatever, that I knew would be willing to help me. And I made a list of what their area of expertise was, and who they were. And so that just doing that activity alone helped me to feel better, that I could move forward and to expect the stumbles, but to have a plan in place. And I absolutely have used it. And then I think LinkedIn has been a really big part of my journey, because my office is at home. So I don't work in a co-working space. I'm not around a lot of other people. And so this was a way for me to connect with people globally, to learn from them, to be educated and inspired and entertained and challenged. There have been a lot of people that have challenged me, like, well, maybe you should think about it this way. And at first, the ego wants to say no.
You get defensive.
Way is the best way, but I'm pretty good about, let me process, let me take a little while to think through this and then come back at it from your angle and see if it makes sense. And there have been many times where I've been like, okay, that was good. Putting myself out there, connecting offline, just like we're doing right now, right? And I would say in the last 2 years, I have friends with people from all over the world that have enriched my life in ways that I could never have imagined. And it was all because I started putting myself out there on LinkedIn. And, I didn't start out with, I wasn't strategic about it. I never thought, let me build a community. It just happened organically. And it's just been such an amazing journey. I feel like no matter where I go, I can, contact people across the globe, and I will have friends to see wherever I travel. And that's pretty cool.
It is cool. And it definitely is a huge part of my activity on LinkedIn. I mean, even starting a conference just to get people face to face that I've met online through LinkedIn that I desperately want to learn from in person.
Yeah.
And spend real time with. Yeah. So I completely agree with that. And I think one of the things that really helps us when we choose to step into transformation, if we are taking those risks, is we don't build our network when we need them. We build them before we need them.
Yes.
And again, if you're not stepping out, if you're not taking those risks, you're leaving so many opportunities on the table.
Yes. Yes.
And that just makes me sad, especially when it comes to connecting with people all over the world and learning different perspectives and just growing your world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best way to think about building a community is to be a giver, to be a helper. And when you do that for others, it just comes back to you in spades. And not to expect it, but just knowing that it will, because you're paying it forward, and it will come back to you. And if you think you can do it alone, you're wrong. We all need that support from others. And sometimes it's just somebody saying, hey, I was thinking about you, maybe on a day when you're not having a great day. And that's just enough to make you feel like, okay, I matter. I have made an impact with this one person, and to keep you going and keep that momentum going. So
completely agree. And that is a perfect place to end our conversation. This has been great, and exactly what I thought it was going to be in terms of talking about transition and some
stories that we have experienced as a result of putting ourselves out there and choosing transition, choosing to take risks, because it really is a choice. And making sure that you're surrounded with people who are going to support and encourage you is really, I think that's the only way to make it happen. And it's certainly the way to make it happen less painfully.
Absolutely. 100%.
Well, thank you, Kris, for joining me on this podcast. I will have an associated blog post on my website, and it will be published in the next couple of weeks. I publish a new one every Tuesday. So yours will be on a Tuesday. I'm not sure exactly which Tuesday, but I will make sure that you know about it. So thank you again. I really appreciate this.
You are welcome. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?